Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial here on my channel. Today we are going to be making some liquid drum and bass from scratch. Now this should be interesting. I've made a lot of dance floor tutorials, stuff like that. This will be a bit different to that. And I'm going to show you the end result before we even get started here. But of course in this video we'll be going over lots of content such as songwriting, sound design, mixing, all of that good stuff. If it helps you out, be sure to drop a like and subscribe for more content like this. But with that being said, here is the track we will end up making in this video. Alright, so starting things off, I do have a piano VST loaded up. We're going to go into piano roll here. I also have my MIDI keyboard on in front of me, which I'm going to use to play down some chords with a metronome on, and we'll see what we come up with. I'm going to enable that up here, and go ahead and record. I do always recommend you try to use MIDI keyboard if you can. I think you'll get more like realistic results than if you were to put everything in, say, at the same velocity in piano roll, and then try to randomize it yourself. You'll always get something better, I feel, if you actually do this for real. My keyboard is actually kind of small though, so I'm going to need to go in afterwards and add more notes that I otherwise couldn't, but it does start with a real bass, so we're going to go ahead and do that now. So these are the chords I just came up with here. We're going to try to do something to that. This is obviously not perfect right now, this was just recorded in raw. We're going to go ahead and tweak this a bit, maybe add some additional notes, get everything on the grid, and just see what we could come up with. So starting off, I'm going to press Ctrl and Q on my keyboard. This assigns everything to the nearest point on the grid. This is not going to be perfect though, it will require some changes, which I'm going to skip to after I've done now. Alright, so I have made a few changes here. First off, I did put everything on the grid as I wanted it, and I added a few notes and also added a second half where I added a different top line to make it more interesting. I'm also going to boost the volume a bit because it's quite quiet. We're going to do some processing in a bit, but before we do, here's what we have now. Might change it a bit later on. Right now I do think this needs some compression though, it's kind of jumping out a bit in terms of volume in different spots, and I think this will make it a lot easier to work with. I'm going to throw in a big compressor, this being gain reduction. I love this plugin. This is going to over compress it quite a bit, so we need to dial it back, but let's listen to what we got. Something like that will end up sounding good. I also think this piano, because we're making some liquid here, it wants to be pretty wet, give it a nice vibe. So we're going to add a reverb plugin built into FL, just Fruity Reverb 2, and crank it up a bit so we get. That's a little much, we're going to reduce that. I think that's pretty good though. So this is going to be kind of the main focus of it. I think it's just going to be a nice vibey chord drop, but we're also going to add a bunch of supporting elements to make it sound even better. Okay, one of the next things I'm going to add to this track here is an element that just kind of goes behind the piano, a little bit higher just to give it a bit more atmosphere. I'm going to make a new serum patch, and this is going to be something that's heavily reverbed, by the way. So we're going to go ahead and paste in our chords, and rather than have it how it is now, I'm going to edit it to make it much more static. So that gives us this. And then, because I do have a variation second half, we are also going to redo that, just that way it's not completely copy and pasting the first bit, because we do want to maintain that variation. So even though this is following like the same basic chord progression, I do have different things going on with the voicing to make it more interesting on a second repetition. So now that gives us this for the second half. Much more interesting than if we kept it just like this, looping over and over, and that's just by adding a few extra notes. So obviously right now this doesn't sound good, it's just saws, but we are going to make this work with relatively minimal effort. I'm going to start by just doing a little low pass and making this nice and wide, something like this. And then drowning that in reverb. Give it an octave up on oscillator B, similar. And then we're going to layer that quite far in the background. It's not meant to really be too noticeable, just something to add some atmosphere, like I said, so. It's actually still a little bright, gonna reduce this even more. This is just an important lesson as well. Don't listen to things just soloed, make sure you're listening in context, because those decisions are gonna matter. That's kind of more what we wanted. It's a little boomy right now, which we could fix with an additional EQ. Good. Now I think this is about ready for some bass. That's going to be really important to obviously giving us a drop here, because that's sort of what I'm designing right now. So we're going to separate these into their own patterns, and I'm going to take the bass line from this MIDI. So I am going to go into sound design how exactly I would make this, because I think this is a super important role, obviously, in drop. And my bass lines are usually fairly simply designed, but I think this will work perfectly. So what I'm going to do first off, make this just a sine wave. So that's obviously too high, we need to lower that. Right here is good. But this is going to be really hard to hear on certain devices. Like if you're on phone speakers, you probably can't even hear that. What we're going to do really easily to make this sound good, we're going to make sure that our bass is mono compatible. This means obviously like club systems are mostly mono. You don't want your bass to be phasing in and out of itself basically. I'm going to enable oscillator B, also make it a sine wave, and we're going to go into the table edit screen here. I'm actually going to get rid of the fundamental, so right now there's nothing, and I'm going to individually draw in additional harmonics. That gives us a sound like this. And this layer is going to be nice and wide. But obviously, our actual sub, being the sine wave, is not. That's just one voice. So this will sound good, and is still completely phase-safe, mono-compatible, and it's much easier to hear now. We could even increase that some more by distorting it a bit. This will give it even more in like the mids area. Nice and easy to hear on different systems now. You see, we have that much going on, rather than before when it was just a sine wave, and it sounds very cool. That was done in, just a couple of seconds. Very easy way to get a bass line. But obviously now we need to change to the MIDI, because this, as it stands, isn't very interesting. We're going to listen to it with the rest, and see what we need to do to it. I think I'm just going to do some slides and octave jumps, really, so we're going to make that mono here, and up this a bit, so that way we could actually hear those slides happening. And just kind of do this as you go, see how it feels. Here's a good spot. That's pretty good, and I'm going to copy and paste, put that all together. That's sounding pretty good so far. I think the next thing I want to do is kind of a little semblance of a lead. This is going to be very basic and just sine wavy, but I think that's sort of the vibe that this track wants. So I've gone over this sound quite a few times before, but we're just going to make a cool little heavy reverb and compressed sine pluck. That's going to introduce our main melody, which as of right now I've not even thought of yet, so we're going to have to draw that in and see what we come up with. But basically I've just made a sine wave with very short decay, putting a reverb on it, followed by a massive compressor. Then we're going to add oscillator B, which is just going to, I guess, an octave up with some unison. Gives us a sound sort of like this. And we're just going to draw that in over the chords and see if we get something cool. So I'm actually just going to kind of leave this recording going here so you can see my melody writing process. Mainly I like to look at the chords because it gives you like basically a visual of what notes you could use. It's not limited to just these, but it's a good starting point. I think I might do something like this. There we go. Something basic like that is honestly really cool. So you see, that's literally just using the notes from the chords that I could see, and we got this as a result. So that's not perfect yet, it's still kind of loud, and it needs some delay, I think, in the patch itself, because I like the way that serum delay works. Enable that here. This is just tweaking around so you get like a good idea of what you want your sound to be like, so. Something like that's very nice, maybe some chorus. I'm also thinking maybe add some noise, make it air can, it's a nice sound. And then that'll give us something to feed into a bit crusher to make the sound a bit more interesting. Something like that, and then we control it with an EQ after the fact, like this. And then I think next time it goes around, we're going to go an octave up. We're almost ready to add some drums. I do think this needs one more thing, and I'm actually going to use a plugin known as Analog Lab 5. This has a very cool Mellotron preset in it, which I think is going to be perfect for giving us sort of like a vintage but nice sort of high-endy sound to go with everything else here. Demonstrate exactly what I mean. This is a sound I use a ton. Sounds like this by default. But if you edit this, that's sort of what I want, but with a lot of reverb, so it kind of cleans up the gaps that you get in between chords. So just huge like this. I think that'll work good, but we have to listen to it and find out. It's a little bright, so we're going to fix that with an EQ. Something like that. Now I'm thinking structure-wise, we could go B section here, which would mainly just be is kind of something you can get away with in drum and bass. Just literally drums and bass, so we're going to add that in a second here. But we have this sort of happening, and then maybe on we build it out. This is just like picking elements from your drop to structure your track, you know, make it longer. Get a section that sounds sort of like this, but we're going to go ahead and add some drums now because this does really need it. One of the ways I quickly work in FL Studio, and you could do this in other DAWs as well, I make a channel called SC for sidechain, and I put every element on it that I'm going to sidechain. I wouldn't do this in a final mix because things kind of need to be more individualized, but when you're just doing a work in progress like this, it totally works. Just add every single instrument that you're going to end up sidechaining. That's just going to go to that channel, so you could save CPU and just do it with one. Then we take the kick trigger I already have in here, sidechain to this track. I do my sidechaining with Pro MB, I've explained this before, but there are free ways you could do it with Fruity Limiter. We're just going to tie that to it, and set this up for when we add our drums in just a second. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on sidechaining, I do have that as well on my channel, which you could see in the card on screen now. We're just doing a separate instance here for eyes. This will make much more sense once the drums are in. We're going to go ahead and add those now. Got a kick here. I think it's a little bright, but in general should work. So we're going to add an EQ to that quickly, just get rid of some of the highs. I think this one, because it's a more minimal track, is going to benefit from something that literally sounds like that. There's not too much going on, but it's totally going to work. So we copy and paste these. We need a snare as well. So that's a little big, which we could fix. Something like that. Tighten things up a bit, kind of nice. And this needs some tops. Now top-wise, I'm going to keep this very simple. I'm going to grab a hat that I know I like a lot. One of these. Very short, but it'll keep it to the point. Literally just do a rhythm like that. And then we make it interesting with some fades, which is really easy to do in FL. What we're going to do, this is a nice little groove trick I've learned. Take your hats and highlight every instance where it's covered by something else, like here a kick and a snare, and just fade the beginning a bit. And listen to what that does. You solo it, maybe do more. Gives it some rhythm that otherwise wouldn't be there. It'd be very static otherwise. You see, that's a nice basic drum rhythm, but totally works. The hats definitely need to be turned down a bit, though. It's very obnoxious right now anyway, which we could easily fix. Just do something. Now we're going to grab a top loop to kind of spice this up a bit and make it even better. Something nice and minimal, I think. And I've added drums to the B section, which right now is very empty. It's just bass. It needs more. It sounds like this right now. Something like that. That rhythm would actually be really cool. That was just something I came up with on the spot here, but make it a reality. It'd be like that. I think that will fit nicely into what we've got going on here. But remember, that also needs to go, when you're making additions like this, needs to go into your sidechain channel that we made before. But now, it sounds like this. Much more interesting right off the bat, and that's literally init preset on Serum. Just added a second voice of unison and did some modulation to a low pass filter. That's it. It's just the song patch. Nice and easy. We're gonna beef it up a little bit though. So like, maybe some reverb. And maybe make this open up a bit as it goes on, because that could be some nice movement over time. Not too much, but slower than that even, like over an 8-bar. Something like that could be really cool. Let's see how it sounds. Now, I don't think this sound is going to work over the initial drop, but we need to check and see. Let's give it a listen. Yeah, it gets too busy. I don't like how that sounds here, but when all the other elements from this part are gone, it works very well. Next thing we're going to do, we're kind of doing this in a weird reverse order. We're going to make a bit of a build-up. So I'm going to move everything over. It'll be an interesting sound. We need a clap, kind of get the rhythm going before we even introduce like build-up drums. There's a bit of delay on the sample here, which I'm going to get rid of. Could be nice in some instances, but I don't want it on this. Something like that. Obviously, it's going to be quieter. We're just going to copy it down. Quieter like this. And then on this bit, so the second half, I'm going to add our little lead from before, because we want to foreshadow that drop melody before it happens. And I think this will actually just work in its current place like this. Drag in a snare roll, and that should sound pretty tight already. Then we add some risers. So there's one in this pack. Does the job nice and easy for us. Quiet. Going to cut that here and add a crash because I don't want that to go on the whole way. Maybe a kick as well. And a snare to transition us straight into that drop. Here, actually. And we're going to cut everything when that snare happens. And add another crash straight on our drop. Nice. So this is almost where I want it, but I do think we need to layer in a break just to kind of make this a little more glued together because it does sound a bit basic still. I want something nice and airy. This one might be good. Oh, that one's really nice actually. Perfect. So we're going to add that to its own mixer. Cut out the lows because they're going to interfere with our drums otherwise. And layer this in with our drums. That's very close to what I want, however the snare is conflicting a bit. And I'll show you a good way I usually get rid of that problem. It's an easy. So what I will do, I'll take an EQ out like I already have. I'll find the snare fundamental, which is basically the low point of the snare that pokes out. I'm going to actually boost it here just so you see what I'm talking about. This. Hear this? Take that fundamental, and then cut it out really far, like that. That almost works. There's something a little up here. Yeah. Get rid of that. And now look at the difference. With the break that I've just added. And without. It's just given this little drum loop I made here so much life. Suddenly it's where I want it, which is nice. One other tip I have for drums specifically. Make a drum bus, and you're going to put every hit that's part of your drums onto this. So like right now I'm going to put the kick here. put the snare on it, put our tops, put the break as well. And then you're going to take that drum bus, basically route it to another channel next to it so it's playing twice. This is going to sound really distorted. Doesn't sound good, but what we do on that channel, add a reverb and get rid of all dry. So now it's just reverb, obviously, but we're going to EQ that separately. This is just a way to give us the option to do that. Get rid of something like that, and then make it very quiet. So if we listen to that on its own, too much decay, I think. Like, you see, what that is doing sounds like this. Just giving it some space. You might not really notice that too much, but if I got rid of it, you would. So it's very important to do that, to put your drums in a space. Now I think I'm going to add some risers into this build-up, and I'll show you what we have. Okay, I've just structured this a bit, given it a little piano intro. I'm going to preview what we have now, and that is going to be a wrap for this tutorial. This is a relatively simple piano liquid drum and bass track I've put together here. A little bit on the punchier side compared to a lot of liquid, but I think that's a nice little direction I've seen it go in a few times here. Let me know what you think of that in the comments. If this helped you out, be sure to drop a like and subscribe for more tutorials like this in the future. But that about wraps things up. I'm going to go ahead and play it in full now, and I'll see you in the next one.